Jacinta, Carolyn, Maria, Henry, Anne, Martha, Eliza J., Charlotte Ann, Maria.
On one particular trip, I was here for
Mary.
the UNESCO International Day of Remembrance. And on that particular trip, I was to read the names of the former enslaved. And as I read the names, there came a point to where I thought I had just read the names of my second and third grandmothers. I didn't say anything to anybody about it for weeks. It took weeks before I would actually say anything to anyone about it, because I had to work through those feelings. And then, of course, I had to eventually tell what happened. And, because it's one thing to see those names on a slave schedule, because I had seen them on the slave schedules. But it's totally something different to read your ancestors' names on a wall on a plantation.
The work that is going on here, the descendants of slave owners and the descendants of slaves, if you can reach common ground, is a model for the nation.
Because Sotterley really is connected to a whole lot of people, whether they know it or not. People came here, people arrived on ships here, people were sold here. The property itself changed hands several times. So there are a whole lot of people who are connected to Sotterley, and they aren't even aware of it yet.
So we are part of Middle Passage Ceremonies and Port Markers Project and the UNESCO Slave Route Site of Memory. So we remember those people that perished on the Middle Passage. So there's many people that didn't make the voyage. They died. There were 28 people or so that died of smallpox on the Generous Jenny and were thrown overboard, basically. And the rest landed here at Sotterley to be sold or to work for James Bowles or to be sold further south.
You get to come here and learn so much about both the enslaved and the enslavers. And it's kind of peaceful, believe it or not, it's kind of peaceful, especially with the water being right on the Patuxent. And you get to walk around, and because knowing about slavery, you do have your emotional side. 1 minute you're angry, the next you're not. And here you're able to work those things out. It's kind of therapeutic being here, as well as educational.
And my people that are living today, they are proud of our ancestors, the things that they did. And I'm lucky to be connected to Sotterley.
My great-grandfather, who was born a slave here, may have lived in this cabin or one very similar to it, because when he was born here, he was born a slave. The Board of Trustees invited me to join after my mother had served. So my mother and I talked about it, and I said, well, I don't know. She said, yeah, no, go ahead and do it. And I want you to go down there, and the only thing I want you to do is keep your eyes on that slave cabin. Do not let those folks tear that slave cabin down. And so here I am. I think the importance for her, and also for me, is that feeling of being connected. We always hear other Americans, mostly white Americans, talk about, well, my grandmother's French and Irish, and my grandfather's German and Russian, and You know, when they have these stories and they can go back several generations. She could only go back to two, her father and her grandfather, who she only knew for a couple of years. But finding that he was born at a certain location, and now she could even imagine that he was even born in this cabin, made her immensely proud.
Growing up near Sotterley, as I did, I always knew that our family used to own Sotterley, but that was probably the extent of my knowledge. We didn't really talk about or even understand, the history in detail, such as that the family owned a large plantation with a large number of slaves. That wasn't really a part of the discussions, but as obviously research has been done, and when my father was the president of the board, or prior to that actually, and he met a descendant of our family's enslaved, Agnes King Callum. They came to be friends and collaborators on working to preserve Sotterley. To be the next generation doing that is incredibly powerful and impactful, I think. And people, when they realize that, and say how, really special and unique that is, it helps you evolve as a person to accept your history, the good and the bad. And it's a journey that my family and I are on, and other descendants. But it's been a very, rewarding and interesting process that we're still dealing with every day.
This weekend was totally incredible. From the descendants panel with multiple descendants from California, Baltimore, here right in St. Mary's County, we were able to speak about the common ties that we have. You get to see the plethora of the emotions tied to things as we journey into the unknown. Some people are embarrassed by their history. I was always taught in school, if you look like me, your ancestors were slaves. Only thought about them working in the field because that's the only thing that we were really shared. We knew about Harriet Tubman, we knew about Frederick Douglass, and a few others, but we didn't know they contributed anything outside of field labor. So on the journey to discovering ancestry, you find out the actual contributions of the people who were enslaved, because they had a culture before they came here, and they brought that here. They brought those skill sets here and helped to build this community. And that's something that I wasn't taught in school. So therefore, there was no value in coming to Sotterley in 7th grade. But as a young adult coming back, I see great value. It took a few decades to heal, but learning and becoming aware that everybody's life journey is worth talking about. Everybody brings something to the table, and everybody has value. And the courage and strength that it took my ancestors to survive slavery, it's in my DNA.
I felt lucky to have known my maternal grandmother's parents, my great-grandparents, and they talked about their families all the time. And that was the one thing that I was grateful for because of a school project in 1987. Hey, let's do our family trees and let's present it to the class. So I began asking those hard questions. Who are we? Where did we come from? Who we're related to? Whereas my mom's generation and my aunts and uncles, some of their cousins, like, no, don't ask grandma and granddaddy those questions. That's very personal and private. And I was like, well, why not? It's just learning about history. Fast forward to the 21st century, we now have DNA testing. We now are realizing, oh my goodness, the people that grandma said was a different set, no, they're not a different set. They're the same set. We just weren't raised that we were family because it was always the narrative, that's a different set. And so now DNA testing is proving, man, our family is much bigger than what we thought. And it's not just here in the United States. It's now across the Atlantic in various countries and on the other side of the world. And my cousin Jerome touched on that in his presentation. It's amazing at what pairing science with traditional documentation research, traditional mapping, taking a drive through the country, you begin to make connections, and it transcends the borders of what we know as race or ethnicity. It really, it's about people. And if we connect with people, if we connect with the landscape, the possibilities are endless.
I connect to Sotterley through, of course, my people, the Blackstones and the Williamses. But I also connect to Sotterley through people like the Briscoes, people who have been here for almost 400 years, all the names that we know that go along with the Sotterley story.
So I have a collage. One of the presentations I do, I have a collage of a number of my ancestors. And you can look in their eyes, you can see the faces of these people, and you can only imagine what they must have gone through in 1900, in 1865, in 1730, or whatever era they were from, and what was going on in America at that time. When I look at those faces and they look back at me, what I see those folks saying, Jerome, you can do some things that we couldn't do. You can go places we couldn't go. You can be things we couldn't be. We did what we could on our watch, and we want you to soar. We want you to expand and push this thing forward, and maybe nudge the next generations that come behind you to do even better than what you're doing. And so, to the extent that seeing those pictures of those ancestors, and having the sense that they ran their leg of the race, and now I got the baton in my hand, and there is an obligation to get around the track smartly.
Sotterley provides a tangible marker to gauge how far we've come and vividly illustrates that human social progress doesn't occur in the absence of sacrifice.
I look at the time that I've been here and the changes that I've seen. Certainly, bringing about having our tours changed and the training of the docents change was one of the integral pieces, but it's been across all these different parts of Sotterley, all these different programs that these changes have been huge as they all add up together, creating living histories, the choice about Sotterley's War of 1812 story, redoing the tours and created new guided tours that were never part of our story, redoing our signage. Our Land, Lives, and Labor exhibit is incredible and really brings to life the stories of the people upon whose backs the site was built. And then the slave cabin. That exhibit and making it available for everybody who comes on site was such a major turning point. But so was the start of the Descendants Project and absolutely the Common Ground Initiative. These are about taking history and now bringing them into a context where we can talk about what history has brought us to today and how maybe by talking about this, we can not only understand the past, but understand our present and start to move forward. And our descendants are leading the way on that front.
I call the program Common Ground because we have a shared history. And this programming brings us together, our stories, and have hard discussions about the legacy of slavery and how it affected our whole nation. Our Descendants Project was formalized. We've always really had descendants here and there, active, but we decided in 2019 to formalize the Descendants Project, and it's just really grown.
It's allowed healing across racial lines, and it's also allowed us to add multiple layers to the story of what our ancestors at Historic Sotterley, whether it was those who owned slaves or those who were enslaved, it's allowed us to add a much broader story for individuals to understand what life was like for those who lived and labored here during slavery and also post-emancipation.
The important thing about the history of Sotterley is that now you have people who can tell it so very well, who have studied it, who know it, who are the descendants of it. Makes a big difference when you're actually part of the land that you're talking about.
What I hope for Sotterley is that, of course, it can continue on the path it is on. So many strides have been made, so many accomplishments that it has evolved from just a kind of a more narrowly focused old plantation to a very all-encompassing historic site and museum that tells stories that, you know, are so compelling and inclusive, all the true stories that were very much hidden in years past. And I hope that we can continue on that trajectory. But of course, I hope that Sotterley can just continue just from a financial standpoint, a sustainability standpoint, because that's always been a challenge. And it'd be nice to be able to focus more on our mission and the great programming and education that we provide to the community instead of having to worry about the realities of the funding, which we do presently. That would be my hope for the future.
I hope that Sotterley will become a place where every child in particular who wants to come and see what a working farm looks like from 400 years ago can be welcomed here and can be told the truth about what happened here. Not some fantasy, some made-up tale, but the actual truth about the slaves, the free people, the owners, how they interacted, how they didn't interact, how they made it work, how they survived, especially how they survived.
Whether we like it or not, Sotterley is the place where life in America began for many of us. And it's also the place where I can say I truly walk in my ancestors' footsteps. So